And now I turn to the chief speaker of today's program, Dr. Manoj Kumar. Dr. Manoj Kumar, after completing his medical graduation from his home state, he completed his graduation from Calicut Medical College. After completing his graduation, he went to Ranchi and completed MD in psychiatry. He received further training in famous Christian Medical College at Vellore, and he decided to work as a faculty member in Christian Medical College till 1994. Dr. Kumar decided to leave for UK in 1994 for further training. After obtaining necessary qualifications that are required in UK, he joined St. James University Hospital, Leeds. During his stay in UK, he was regularly visiting his home state, and he was moved by the plight of poor mentally people in Kerala. He also realized that latest research, which is called as evidence-based research, has to be brought into reality. Research is only useful when it is brought into practice. Dr. Manoj Kumar has combined latest concepts of task sharing involving lay mental health workers, telepsychiatry into his practice and developed his own innovative model. He was selected for Ashoka Fellow, a very prestigious award which is given by Ashoka Innovators for the Public, a USA-based charity. Dr. Manoj Kumar is working with more than 1,000 volunteers and treating more than 2,500 patients. I won't take more time. All of us are eager to know about what is this model, what are the innovative ideas, because it is said that this innovative model can be replicated all over India because it addresses the basic problems of India, and that is very limited professionals and so on. So with this I request Dr. Manoj Kumar to give his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vartak. Thank you for that kind introduction. I hope I am audible. Mr. Kele, just give me a thumbs up if I'm audible. Thank you. So the last few days I've been interacting with Dr. Vartak, and I've been really impressed by the efforts he has taken to understand our model. Thank you, sir. And also my thanks to Mr. Abhay Kele, Dr. Shinde for setting the scene with an overview. And I enjoyed Dr. Vartak's presentation as well. Many months ago, when I received an email from Mr. Amrit Bakshi, I was quite overjoyed because the invitation was for me to deliver an oration in Pune this day. Pune holds a special place in my heart because some of my closest family lives there, so I was looking forward to traveling to Pune. And also when I looked at the list of prestigious people who had spoken at this annual event, I was quite honored to be the last in that line. But alas, the COVID-19 pandemic has put paid to all that. But still, it is fantastic to be here with you this evening and to see that more than 100 people are sharing. I apologize for my linguistic inadequacies. I can't speak to you in Hindi or Marathi, so I'll do my best in English. I also need to acknowledge all my colleagues. As Dr. Vartak said, we work with a large number of volunteers, more than 1,000 people. So I all what I'm going to describe today is due to their untiring efforts. My gratitude to them for making this work possible, and also my colleagues in Mental Health Action Trust, MHAT, some of whom are listening today, some of whom have been with me for many years. So it is as a result of the hard work of a lot of people that I am able to speak today and convey some new concepts to you. Yes, so greetings from Mental Health Action Trust, MHAT, from all my colleagues. Just to put things in perspective, you all know where Kerala is located. It's on the southwest corner of the country. We are based in Kozhikode or Calicut, which is in the northern parts of the state. We are quite a small state. We are the 7th smallest of the 29 states. But in terms of density of population, we are the 13th most populous state. Many of you would have heard of the advances that Kerala has made in terms of various indices: literacy, economy, life expectancy, and most importantly, in health. So that is the background for this work. Of the 14 districts of Kerala, we have a presence in 8 of the districts. We are a registered charitable trust. We work completely in the voluntary sector. And the bulk of our work is in providing free care for the economically backward people with enduring mental illnesses, the problems of which you have heard Dr. Shinde describe. So to understand anything, a bit of history is always useful. So if I can remind you about what we have gone through to reach where we are. The first step in the development of psychiatry in modern era was the awareness around 200 to 300 years ago. And mind you, this was in Western Europe. And all of these points we should remember in trying to understand the situation in India today, where supernatural causation is still believed in by a vast majority of the population. But as a race, as humankind, we came to understand that madness is an illness, and rather than being caused by evil spirits or supernaturally caused. And that was the turning point which set off the modern era of psychiatry. And therefore, quite naturally, ill people deserve care and compassion rather than being punished. And also, society had slowly come to realize that ill people, sick people, have their rights and privileges, rights to get better and privileges during the process of getting better. And that paved the way for setting up of care institutions, initially called asylums or lunatic asylums, to care for and protect the mentally ill. That was a significant step as society recognized that it has an obligation to people labeled as mentally ill to care for and protect them. There was also the agenda of protection of public from people who were considered mad. However, while this was a very positive step, we must remember that effective methods of treatment were not available. And therefore, an initiative which began as one for caring and protecting people, in your state, Yerwada is probably the best example, descended into places of abuse. This happened systematically over a couple of, over 1.5 centuries everywhere in the world because effective treatments were not available. And therefore, that is why to this day, we look at mental asylums or mental hospitals these days with fear and loathing. However, all this was due to change about 60 to 70 years ago, when the first effective medications were discovered for the treatment of schizophrenia and later other mental disorders. Along with this came an increasing understanding of the brain abnormalities which underlay mental disorders. So even though we had understood for 200 to 300 years that mental illnesses were illnesses rather than visitations by evil spirits, the brain understanding, the brain abnormalities which led to illnesses like schizophrenia, the advances have been only in the last few decades. And that led to the growth of psychiatry as a science with its own systems of diagnosis and classification, even though they are rather imperfect, but because we still don't know exactly what goes wrong in the brain. And therefore, as more and more became understood, we realized that the need for institutions is less than what it was thought to be. And therefore, the birth of what we now call community mental health or community psychiatry began. So from institutions, patients began to lead more normal lives, either in protected environments or in their own homes, with care being delivered in the community. So that was the last turning point in terms of, if you look at psychiatry in the modern era. So much so that almost all the large asylums in the developed parts of the world, the United Kingdom, for example, USA, for example, have all been shut and care has moved into the community. So the current situation is that we have a mixture of both institutional care and community care. However, in terms of treatments available, we have come to the situation where biomedical treatments dominate. So for most of us, mental health care would mean, if it is possible, and if it's not possible for large sections of the population in rural areas, if it were possible, it would mean a visit to a psychiatric hospital or a psychiatrist who would make a diagnosis and start treatment with medications. Now, Dr. Shinde has described all else that should go on for people to recover or for people's rehabilitation. However, in most parts of India, those are not available. So even though psychiatry has moved forward, most care still remains institution-based and not in the community. It could be either as inpatient treatment or in clinics attached to hospitals or standalone clinics, but the entire ethos is still based on institutions. And therefore, the stigma about mental illnesses continue. It's one of the last bastions of stigma and neglect. Violence against mentally ill people is quite common. Discrimination is rife. And as a group of patients, compared to any other group of patients, mentally ill people receive the worst of stigma and neglect. In most countries, within the public mental health system, mental health services are under-resourced. And suffice to say that in India, against the background of gross neglect of our public health systems, it pains me to say that we, as a nation, we spend very little on public health. Less than 1.5% of our gross, of our budget is spent on health. Most developing nations, it is about 10 to 15% of their spending is on health. So our public mental health system, public health system in general is grossly under-resourced and neglected. So overall, the situation is that in large parts of the country, a lot of people go without getting good quality mental health care. They might have to travel long distances. They might have to spend a lot of money because most of the care is in the private sector. And it is well known that medical expenses, including psychiatric expenses, are factors which push people into poverty. So the situation across the country, if you look at it as a whole, is not really good. So in this scenario, what we are missing out on, while we have increasing numbers of psychiatrists, the numbers of other colleagues who should be there to provide multidisciplinary care, psychologists, psychiatric social workers, nurses, and occupational therapists, their numbers are very small. So psychiatry has shrunk to be mostly a medically treated specialty. And as Dr. Shinde pointed out, that alone is not enough. For people to recover, you need not just psychiatrists and medications, but you need input from a lot of different specialties. Because the illness may get better, but illnesses do not exist in a vacuum. There is the person who needs to heal. There's the person who needs to get better. And for that, we need multidisciplinary care. Again, as Dr. Shinde said, care in the community is lacking. And what community care means is that people do not have to travel long distances, particularly to formidable institutions or unfriendly hospitals, but people can be seen in neutral venues at home or close to home. And what we have realized, much to my surprise in the last 10 years of my work, is that if we are able to provide good community care, the need for hospitalization is almost entirely eliminated. This has been an eye-opener even for me, because as psychiatrists, we are used to treating people in hospitals. When there are relapses or setbacks, we are used to admitting them and treating them. But this option is only available for a small percentage of people. So multidisciplinary care is lacking, care in the community is lacking, and the full range of services. Support for the family. I think in this audience today, there are probably quite a few people who would have seen mental illnesses at close quarters, and you all would, and everybody would realize the need for family support to be provided along with the care for the individual. The need for rehabilitation cannot be overstated. Symptoms get better, but unless people get back to their original selves and heal to who they want to be, without rehabilitation, lives will not get back to normal. And apart from all these, people require often, either as individuals or as groups, various forms of psychotherapies to regain lost skills, to deal with the illness, and so on and so forth. So in the current scenario, mostly because of resource crunches, these are the things that we are missing out on. So coming on to the MHAT model, we have been doing this for the last decade or so. So the starting point for our model was the realization that there's huge social inequalities, inequities in different parts of our life, particularly so in health and mental health. So people who cannot afford treatment and people who cannot afford to reach treatment are completely left out of the mental health care model. As has been pointed out, there is a huge mismatch of needs and resources. As a big country with a huge population, we do not have enough manpower, trained professional manpower, to meet the huge mental health needs of our population. The pure biomedical model, as we have already seen, is inadequate. And putting all these together, what gave us the confidence to go ahead with a new model is that Kerala has had a long history of pioneering community models, whether it is in literacy, whether it is in other social development, mapping of resources, and so on. So community movements in Kerala have a long history of success, which emboldened us to try similar models in mental health as well. So that is how the mental health, the MHAT model came to be about 11 years ago. Now, the philosophy behind it is that even though we are a registered charity, in a sense, we don't see our work as charity or charitable, because access to good health, particularly good mental health, should be everybody's right. It should not be something that we bestow upon them as charity. It is everyone's right to have access to good quality mental health care. And it should be accessible to everybody. It should be cost effective, because otherwise in a rather poor country like ours, it will not be feasible to have models which are not cost effective. And to people who cannot afford to pay, it should be completely, totally free is what we believe in. And as I have been saying, it should be available close to home. And the whole ethos of care should be such that people are treated with respect and based on equality. So the quality of care is important. It is not just that once in a month we visit a place and hand out a lot of medications. Nobody is happy with that. So people should have access as often as they need. The care should be comprehensive so that it is not just medications, but all the other aspects that I have mentioned. So in many ways, we took the decision that people's mental health is our responsibility. And therefore, our challenge has been to transform essentially what's a reactive health system. For example, we go for help only if we feel unwell. Is that not so? Nobody expects to come and monitor our health and offer us services or warn us about impending illnesses. But that model has huge shortcomings in that hardly any preventative work is possible in a reactive healthcare system. Whereas with proper systems, with proper planning, health of populations can be monitored and maintained at optimum levels. Good examples are of the state-funded healthcare systems in developed nations such as UK. So these are the this is the thinking behind the MHAT model, particularly that it is our responsibility to provide for people who cannot be helped otherwise. In other words, ideas of social justice. So what we have done is that we realized early on that we cannot create healthcare infrastructure. So we felt that leveraging existing healthcare infrastructure is the only thing which we can do. So we connect with a large number of patients through a big team of volunteers. So we are a small team of professionals and trained non-professional mental health workers or lay health workers. These are people who prior to joining with us did not have any kind of professional background or training in mental health care delivery, but with good training and with huge amounts of enthusiasm, these people are able to provide good care. And as Dr. Vartak pointed out, there is good evidence that lay health workers can provide as good care as anyone else. So we have identified existing healthcare structures. It could be primary health centers in the government, it could be already existing hospitals, it could be clinics, it could be any physical structure. The important thing is that the team of volunteers there come forward to work with us. So we've been doing this for more than 11 years. We have 50 centers across 8 districts of Kerala. In each of these centers, we run weekly clinics. So we travel out from Calicut or Kozhikode and visit multiple centers. Different teams go to different centers, multiple centers during a day. So one set of clinics in the morning, one set of clinics in the afternoon. So in that fashion, we cover 50 centers in 8 districts. We have so far treated more than 4,500 patients. And all of this is possible because at each of these places, we have local partners who work in tandem with us. So we identify local partners in new localities, train them in starting our services, and then we start identifying people in their localities and start providing a service. It is cost effective, which is why it has survived for 11 years. We try not to compromise on quality. So all the other aspects I mentioned earlier, which in my opinion go towards making good quality mental health care, availability of medications, not just availability, judicious use of medications, which is given free because all our people are from the lowest socioeconomic strata. So free care, which is of good quality, medications, rehabilitation, which is again community-based. We do not have large centers where people congregate for rehabilitation, but it is again decentralized and in local facilities. And it's entirely community-based, completely eliminating the need for hospitalization. There are 4 key elements to what we do. Decentralization, which I have already mentioned, volunteering, task sharing, which has been alluded to by Dr. Vartak, and the use of technology. As I said, these groups are all locally based, 50 of them. And the important thing is that they are empowered and act as independent or autonomous entities. So they raise their own funds, they organize their own volunteers. So the idea is that we are the external agency providing professional care, while they are the ones who look after their own people living in their midst. The reason for doing it this way, rather than as a franchise of FemHat, is that this is the only way I believe that it will sustain. Because the ownership is local and people are proud of their work. And it's entirely volunteer-based and volunteer-led, except when we associate with the government and with the primary healthcare system. And the volunteers are the backbone, obviously, more than 1,000 of them. They play various roles, starting with running of the clinics, fundraising locally for their own expenses, for buying medication, and then more specialist roles such as monitoring people's mental health weekly at least, and they go on to play more sophisticated roles such as to be involved in rehabilitation, psychosocial interventions and so on, depending on their motivation and willingness to do it. Obviously, it requires a lot of training and ongoing supervision. Training can never be one-off. It needs to be ongoing. Supervision, again, has to be ongoing, and they have to be supported because they are, for the first time in their life, they are playing this role without any professional training. And task sharing is the model whereby the focus is on training people rather than on qualifications. So, for example, there are a lot of things which psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers can all do equally well. There are some things which only a psychiatrist can do, such as prescribing medications. There are some things which only a psychologist can do, and some things which only a social worker can do. But there are a lot of things which are common and which are based on training. So people can act up to play roles which they are not strictly qualified to do so. And that goes for mental health workers who go on to play professional roles. There are a lot of safety mechanisms built in, I can assure you. We are completely conscious of the risks that we could entail. So we focus very heavily on training and supervision so that people are supported in their work, and over a period of time, they grow in stature, they become more confident about what they do, and the whole task sharing cascades across different levels to the volunteers. Technology is the fourth key element, and increasingly so, particularly during this COVID epidemic period. We have a huge population, we have limited resources, and access to care for large sections of the country is limited by the distances. And of course, we lack systems of aftercare. So we see technology as the answer to all of these problems. We use video conferencing to replace face-to-face contact. We use mobile phones quite a lot. We use mobile apps. Recently, we have been trialing an app which is used in tuberculosis to monitor medication compliance or medication adherence. A new app is also being developed which will help us effectively communicate with the volunteers in the community. From the beginning, we have had a very good electronic database of our patients. And over the years, this has also been developed so that now we can generate electronic prescriptions also. So imagine 50 different clinics happening at 50 different places. We have always had one or two doctors, so it was impossible for a doctor to be everywhere. So these clinics run often without a medical presence. But the doctor is there centrally monitoring things on a database. So as a patient is seen, information is entered on the database. If people require supervision, they ring the doctor directly, or if the doctor needs to clarify something, the doctor would ring them. And if a client needs to be seen, they'll be seen over video. So this has been going on for a long time. There was a little bit of lack of clarity about electronic prescriptions, but recent guidelines have come out which makes it legal for sending prescriptions electronically. So that's a big relief for us. Overall, the success depends on having good systems. By recording details of all clients, by monitoring them in real time, by having round-the-clock telephone access for all the volunteers. We don't allow clients or their family members to ring us directly. they get in touch with the volunteers, and the volunteers are allowed to get in touch with us around the clock, so that problems can be sorted out immediately as they arise. We have very good warning systems for early relapse detection, and that is why it may not surprise you to know that we don't require hospitalization, because hospitalization is required when problems get out of hand and there is violence and so on. But we are able to intervene much earlier than that because of the system that I have just described. So what has happened recently during the COVID-19 pandemic? In Kerala, we started the lockdown a couple of days before the rest of the nation. And as soon as that happened, we stopped all the weekly clinics. We stopped traveling to the clinics. And we immediately set about, for the first few days, creating contingency plans, which were immediately conveyed to the rest of the team as well as to our partners. All the clients were advised to stay at home, and the volunteers got together to deliver medications at home. Obviously, this would work only if monitoring by volunteers happened very well. And I'm proud to say that all our volunteers kind of exceeded our expectations. Their monitoring of people became extremely good. And the weekly clinics continued, but they became virtual. So over phone and video conferencing, the weekly clinics in different centers continued. But this time, with a difference in that the clinicians were all sitting in their houses. We started using Zoom meetings straight away on a large scale. We divided all the clinics into 8 zones, and we have regular zonal Zoom meetings where we communicate with our local partners to check how things are going and what could be improved. Almost daily we have sessions within the team also, which we use to discuss plans, to discuss about cases, and also for educational reasons. And I'm glad to say that the transition to this way of working has been extremely smooth. Some of the best work that we do is in Wayanad, the hilly district of Kerala with a large tribal population. Even there, we have been able to maintain our services. In the fashion that I have described. Care has been very well coordinated between different members of the team and between the team and the volunteers and the patients. There have been minor issues with medication delivery. Again, we were lucky in that our local fire services, soon after the epidemic began, volunteered to transport medicines across borders. So if some of the clinics ran out of medicines, we could rely on the emergency services, the fire services to deliver medications, and then that could be sorted out easily. What was really interesting was that the enthusiasm of the volunteers actually increased. So they began monitoring in much more than before, and actually people felt extremely good about this. And the strict weekly clinics became more flexible because the volunteers would visit people at home on days other than the weekly clinics. And we also adapted to a more flexible pattern that was not entirely dependent on the day of the week. And to our happy surprise, we realized that the system was going very well. In fact, to the extent that some of the feedback we have got is that things are even better than before. And that is down to one thing, to the more direct care that they're getting from the volunteers. So what we have learned is that live in-person contact may not be crucial, when already in large parts of the country it is difficult to provide. So contact through telephone is equally effective because people feel that they are looked after and their anxieties are almost non-existent. So the key is that for any service to function well, the local resources have to be strengthened. The local network who look after people rather than the central services is what requires strengthening. So the actual distance from the clinicians or from people who provide the service hardly seems to matter. It is the monitoring, whether in person or through phone, which seems to work best. Having said that, some subgroups of clients obviously will suffer. People who do not take it easily to staying at home, people with learning disabilities, people who attend daycare centers, they all have struggled. They all have struggled to some extent with remaining at home. But as I said, most have remained stable, and some outcomes have been even better than we anticipated. There have been far fewer relapses than normal. Smoking and alcohol cessation has not been as difficult as it was feared. During the first week or so, there were media reports about people committing suicide and so on. But as weeks have passed, people dependent on alcohol and tobacco have seemed to cope really well. And if anxiety has been there, it has not really been about COVID, but about other aspects, mainly economic aspects. So to conclude, two sets of conclusions, if I may. I think it is time that we began to think in terms of how we delivered mental health care to large sections of the population. The fundamentals which have over decades or centuries been of hospital-based care, where people travel long distances to come and see us, is proving to be inadequate. We now have technology to reach out to people in their homes. So if I may venture to suggest, this is the time to ponder changes in the fundamental way of mental health care delivery. And the beauty of it is that everybody wins. People are happy because they do not have to travel long distances. More number of people can be looked after this way because if the travel is eliminated, more people can be seen during that time period. And the beauty of it is that community mental health care is possible in all sectors. It doesn't have to be in the voluntary sector the way I have described. In fact, yesterday I was part of a meeting, of course, a virtual meeting, where in Bangalore, a private rehabilitation service provider was launching home mental health care. The Deputy Chief Minister of Karnataka was in attendance. And what they have done is to start a home-based service where people are assessed at home by trained non-medical professionals who then connect with a medical professional, all this for reasonable fees. So it's a model which is very much viable in the private sector as well. The second set of conclusions is that this time of challenge during this Corona lockdown has actually given us an opportunity to practice unusual solutions. And while we recover, while the country recovers, while the economy recovers, this is an opportunity for the medical field to change. So we should see this as an opportunity rather than as a disaster where everything is going wrong. An increase in technology does not necessarily mean less human contact. All doctors, all clinical doctors, their first thoughts would be, what is most important is my personal contact with the patient, sitting across the table, examining them and so on. Yes, that is ideal, but this is an opportunity to transform to a system which over time can become as good as direct patient care. So once again, my gratitude to the Schizophrenia Awareness Association for giving me this opportunity, and to the 100-odd people who have stayed on to listen. Good evening to you. Thank you very much.
That was a nice guidance by Dr. Manoj Kumar. And our participants are from different, most of the Marathi. So I will request Smita Tai Godse to just give a brief in Marathi so that our audience can have they can have, know the message by Dr. Manoj Kumar. Smita Tai, please.
Thank you, Abhayji. वेळ पाहता अगदी थोडक्यात सांगण्याचा प्रयत्न करते. जेव्हा मनोज कुमार यांच्या लक्षात आले की मनोरुग्णांना कोठडीत डांबवून ठेवणे किंवा साखरदंडांनी बांधून ठेवणे आणि औषधांनी शांत ठेवणे या पद्धतीत आमूलाग्र बदल व्हायला हवेत. औषधांशिवाय इतर बाबी पण खूप महत्वाच्या असतात. म्हणून रुग्णांच्या सर्वंकष सुधारणेसाठीचे एक मॉडेल तयार केले व मेंटल हेल्थ ॲक्शन ट्रस्ट MHAT याची 2008 साली त्यांनी स्थापना केली. कोणत्याही उपक्रमाला सेवेचे अधिष्ठान तर पाहिजेच, परंतु त्याचबरोबर शास्त्राची देखील जोड असेल तर ते काम खूप वेगाने पुढे जाते. तेही त्यांनी दाखवून दिले. काही तुरळक मानसोपचार तज्ज्ञ, केंद्रस्थानी आणि प्रशिक्षण घेतलेले आरोग्य कार्यकर्ते किंवा अगदी सामान्य स्वयंसेवक यांच्या मदतीने डॉक्टर मनोज कुमार यांचे हे प्रतिमान म्हणजे हे मॉडेल उभारलेले आहे. सुरुवातीचे निदान आणि औषध योजना तज्ज्ञांनी बघायची आणि त्यानंतरचे सर्व फॉलोअप्स प्रशिक्षित स्वयंसेवकांनी पार पाडायचे अशा प्रकारची ही रचना आहे. जिथे तज्ज्ञ मंडळी प्रत्यक्ष जागेवर पोहोचू शकत नाहीत तिथे टेलिफोन व इंटरनेटचा वापर करून म्हणजे टेलिसायकॅट्री पद्धतीचा उपयोग करून रुग्णाचे निदान करायचे. रुग्णाच्या दैनंदिन समस्येसाठी आणि पुनर्वसनासाठी स्थानिक प्रशिक्षित कार्यकर्त्यांची मदत घ्यायची. अशा प्रकारे केंद्रीभूत व्यवस्था बदलून ती जास्त विकेंद्रित झाली. केरळमधील 8 जिल्ह्यांमधून MHATच्या 50 बहुउद्देशीय मानसिक आरोग्य केंद्रांतर्फे या सर्व गोष्टी पार पाडल्या जातात. या व्यवस्थेमुळे तज्ज्ञ कमी असले तरी ते अनेक रुग्णांपर्यंत पोहोचू शकेल. प्रशिक्षित स्वयंसेवकांकडून आवश्यक असणारे मार्गदर्शन व आधार सहज उपलब्ध झाल्याने रुग्णांना मदत करण्याचा खर्चही 50% कमी झाला. शिवाय त्यांना लगेच व दर्जेदार सेवा मिळू शकली. गरीब लोकांच्या आयुष्यात मानसिक आजाराबरोबरच इतरही सामाजिक, आर्थिक आणि इतर आरोग्याविषयी समस्या असतात. त्यामुळे मानसिक आजारांकडे दुर्लक्ष होते. पण मनोज कुमार यांच्या या कामामुळे मानसिक आजारांकडे तितकेच लक्ष दिले जाऊ लागले. दर्जेदार, विकेंद्रित, सर्वांपर्यंत पोहोचणारी आणि सर्वांना सामावून घेणारी व्यवस्था निर्माण केल्यामुळेच गरीब, गरजू लोक आपणहून ह्या सेवेचा लाभ घेत आहेत. हेच त्यांच्या मॉडेलचे यश आहे. मेंटल हेल्थ ॲक्ट ट्रस्टकडे मोजकेच तज्ज्ञ आहेत, पण 1000 स्वयंसेवकांच्या मदतीने ते 2500 रुग्णांपर्यंत पोहोचत आहेत. एखाद्या सरकारी मनोरुग्णालया इतके हे काम एक तप अविरत चालू आहे. चांगुलपणा, प्रामाणिकपणा आणि न्याय या वडिलांकडून मिळालेल्या संस्कारांवर आणि मूल्यांवर आधारित ही संस्था डॉक्टर मनोज कुमार यांनी उभी केली आहे. त्यांचाही संदेश आपल्याला हेच सांगतो की सेवा आणि शास्त्र यावर आधारित तुमचे मॉडेल भक्कम करा आणि मग संकुचित न राहता नियतीने सोपवलेल्या तुमच्या कामाचा विस्तार करा. स्वतः मात्र एक निमित्त मात्र राहून. धन्यवाद.
धन्यवाद स्मिताताई. मी आता चॅट बॉक्स मध्ये काही प्रश्न आहेत डॉक्टर मनोज कुमारांसाठी. तर मी डॉक्टर मनोज कुमारांना विचारू शकतो. एक गौरी रस्तोगी म्हणून यांचा प्रश्न आहे की द क्वेश्चन बाय गौरी रस्तोगी इज हाऊ टू मॅनेज पेशंट्स विथ व्हायलंट बिहेवियर अँड anger, frequent anger. Then one question is there from Sasha. What challenges you have faced while coming up with this model? So if you can just touch both the questions, I will have another 2-3 questions so I can share with you.
Thank you very much. The question about violence. Traditionally, the kind of popular thinking is that by their very nature, mentally ill people are violent. That is what everybody seems to believe. Again, 35 years in this field has taught me that by nature people are not violent. People with mental illnesses by nature are not violent. Violence is a byproduct of how we deal with them. So often violence happens because of the behavioral problems, the overactivity, the strange things that people do, and we try to resist it, we try to control them, and they become angry and violent. So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that how do we deal with violence of mentally ill people anyway? We hospitalize them, we tranquilize them, we give them heavy doses, we sedate them, or we may confine them to, cells or isolation rooms or whatever. But the mainstay of controlling violence is medication. So we do two things. As I said, we have early warning signs of relapse. So if we know that a mentally ill individual is on the verge of a relapse, then it could be something very small as 2 to 3 days of sleeplessness, increased talk, and so on. We act immediately. Because we have these early detection systems, we are able to intervene immediately. And the doses of medications are then increased. Family members cooperate in giving them that. And we do not allow violent situations to develop. Mind you, we're talking about patients who are already under our care. When people are in extremely violent situations, we are not the first port of call usually, because if somebody is violent, they then get taken to the nearest hospital immediately for control. But our cohort of patients, at any point in time, 2,500 people, we are able to manage them with judicious use of medication, which is possible through close monitoring. So violence is not a problem, and violence is easier to control at home rather than in institutional settings, because institutional settings are very artificial, whereas family members have a certain leeway towards people's behavior. And with proper medication, violence is rarely an issue, rarely a serious issue for us. And it is also up to us to treat people in such a way that people do not become violent. I'm kind of happy and relieved to say that in 3.5 decades of work, I've never received any violence from any mentally ill person. So that is my answer. The answer to the second question is, obviously there would be challenges, all kinds of challenges. But anybody running an NGO would know that the biggest challenge is financial. Economic challenges are what limits any NGO. And it has been difficult for us all along the way, particularly now during the COVID pandemic. As an organization entirely dependent on voluntary contributions, we have suddenly seen a drop in our voluntary contributions. It started even before the COVID because of the economic downturn, but the COVID pandemic has been really difficult for us. We have very unfortunately had to give notice to several staff members because we can't afford to give them salary. So that is the challenge everybody faces in terms of funding. The other main challenge has been the lack of acceptance of this model, particularly by professionals. And which is why the current scenario is actually a blessing in disguise for us, because now everybody has to bring in technology, and electronic prescribing has become acceptable and so on. Previously, we used to be criticized on the basis that task sharing is unsafe, electronic prescriptions are illegal, and so on. So the lack of support has been mostly from my own fraternity. As far as the community is concerned, we have been embraced with open arms, because from the patient's point of view or the family's point of view, what is the single thing they want? They want their loved person to be well. So whoever delivers care in whatever modality it does not matter to them, so long as the person with mental illness remains stable. That is all what we want. If we had mentally ill people in our family, that is all we want. We wouldn't care if the medication was homeopathic or Ayurvedic or Siddha or whatever, or black magic or religious, whatever. We will do anything for our family member to become stable. So community has had absolutely no problem in accepting us. The levels of trust have been very high. We haven't had complaints or things going wrong, very little, because we have gone back to a previous way of working where there was implicit trust between patients and doctors. We have lost a lot of that in the commercialized sector, but these are extremely poor patients who are very grateful to the quality of care that they get. And therefore, other challenges have been very few. Initially, we found it difficult to recruit staff, and that is better nowadays. And overall, over 11 years, we have made slow progress to reach where we are. And that is, I should repeat again, thanks to a lot of partnership, a lot of goodwill in the community, a lot of donations from friends and family, and support from everybody else.
Thank you, Doctor. We have a number of questions.
Yeah, I'll try to keep my answers brief.
We cannot take all the questions, but a few I will like to highlight that Durga
Sure.
Prasad is asking about multiple patients in a family and what special frame can be done.
Thank
and
you.
another
No, can I take? I have a bad memory. Can I answer that question?
please.
Yeah,
In short.
that's a very common scenario for us. Prior to this, I had no experience of working in the community in India, and it was a big shock to me that there were so many families with multiple morbidities. People mostly with affective disorders, and often in such families, not only will be there multiple family members, but multiple other problems also. The husband might have deserted, financial problems will be acute, and so on. Again, in a strange way, we find looking after bigger families to be easier than, say, if there are 3 people in a family who are all unwell, which is not uncommon, 3, 4, 5 even. If they were in 5 different families, it would have been far harder. All of them being in the same family would mean that a lot of resources can be pulled, and a single support system put in can support the entire family, monitoring adherence of medications and so on. So actually treating families as a whole in a way is quite easier than treating separate families.
Another question is from Mr. Atin Chawra. He is asking about caregiving. How to, if there is any thumb rule so that he can decide about the dosage for his Shubharti. Can you just
dosage? Dosage, obviously.
Please.
Sorry, dosage obviously is one for the doctor to guide them on.
That's it. Thank you.
In my experience, what happens is that often, because doctors are very busy, they overprescribe medications. They put people on too many drugs and so on. And what families do, in my experience, is that whichever country you work in, they will come to their own judgment and reduce the doses of certain medicines and stop certain medicines and so on. So I play a great role in, I go by, what families tell me. I have huge trust in families. So I go by their judgment quite often, and, usually the families are right. If they say a particular medicine is causing too much problems, you should cut the dose of that, I would let myself be guided by that. Of course, we have all the other safety mechanisms in place. So the rule of the thumb is that efficacy. People should get better without experiencing too many side effects. And your doctor would be your best partner in deciding on that.
Quickly, another one question from Priyanjali. She is asking about any government incentive for the caregiver. It is a far long possibility, but if you can...
No, there is.
Yeah, is it? Okay.
Yeah. Obviously, in Maharashtra, Kerala, all over India, the turning point came when mental disabilities or disabilities due to mental disorders came to be regarded on par with other disabilities. So our patients, the deserving ones, all get their pensions, what are called disability pensions. In Kerala, it is around 700 rupees a month. Not a huge sum for many of us, but for extremely poor people, that helps. So we facilitate that. Our social workers and colleagues in the community facilitate the bureaucratic process of people getting family pensions, disability pensions, and so on. There are two types. The individual gets and the family also get. I won't go into the details because it varies state from state, but we do help them in accessing pensions. And funnily enough, people who receive pensions, their social standing seems to go up. We are also now getting a pension. So they are seen as earning members of the family also.
There are other questions which I will send to you, and you just write it down.
Sure.
Shinde sir, you have some email questions on email. Can you just focus on?
Yes, and also I want to tell you, Dr. Kishore Gujar, he has done one comment. He's a senior psychiatrist here. He congratulated your endeavor, and
Yes,
he also said that it was a nice presentation and congratulate you for the immense service to the mental health clients and their caretakers with the help of volunteers and advanced technology. Hats
Thank you
off
very
to you
Thank you.
and resource personnel. I am highly impressed by your vision and constructive actions. Wish you further success in your endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I have one question from Freddy Alva. How a person in denial mode can be convinced to for the mental health medications in spite of having on and off episodes of delusions and hallucinations?
It's a big problem for everywhere, everybody in this profession. It's a big problem. Now, legally and ethically, there is very little we can do to force medications on people except legally. Now, the Mental Health Act clearly stipulates that there are conditions under which the law can be evoked and people can be given treatment through legal means. But the problem is that is very difficult, very tortuous way of treating people, and police are involved and courts are involved and people are sent to treatment facilities and so on. So people put up with their family members even though they are clearly unwell because they do not want to take that route. So often, even though in the strict sense it is not legal, often families resort to giving medicines surreptitiously. So what happens mostly, I don't know whether Dr. Shinde would agree on this, even though all of us are aware that, it is a difficult situation. Often families, out of their sheer frustration, will resort to giving medications surreptitiously. And we are often faced with that difficult choice, whether to stick to the letter of the law or go by the spirit of the law. I'll leave you to judge that for yourself, but it's a very difficult situation. But often what we find is that this denial, what you termed as denial, essentially a lack of insight into their own illness, is not a permanent phenomenon. Often, after a few days of covert medication, people then start taking medications by themselves. The other thing we have noticed is that if people refuse oral medications, are given injections, after one injection, usually of a long-acting antipsychotic medication, we still use the old flufenacin decanoate, 25 rupees a vial. After the first injection, often people are willing to take medications. And often after they recover, they are quite happy that their family members forced them to take medications so that now they are well. So it's not a very easy situation. Each case has to be seen in its own merit. But it's a big problem. But there are ways around it if family members want to go that way. If not, then the legal way is the only option.
Sir, are you giving depot injections in their houses or what? How you give the things?
Both. Depot injections are given at home as well as in the weekly clinics. If people are well and it's just a maintenance medication, they come to the clinics and get the injection done there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Abhay sir?
शिंदे सर आपले संपले असतील काही देर आर सम क्वेश्चन्स रिगार्डिंग द स्टॅटिस्टिक्स अँड डेटा सो आय विल जस्ट फॉरवर्ड दॅट क्वेश्चन्स टू यू अँड यू जस्ट हेल्प टू प्रोव्हाइड दॅट डेटा
Sure.
I will we are near the conclusion but I will just like to mention it because we have we just lost our big support Ranjana Tai Bakshi, Mrs. of our ex-president, previous president, past president Amrut Kumar Bakshi ji. She just left us for the heavenly abode, and in her memory, we are deeply showing condolence before in this meeting, and I will convey my regards to the Bakshi family. Smita Tai, over to you for the Thanksgiving. Dr. Anil Vartak, you want to share something before that?
So, yeah. Smita Godse can propose word of thanks, huh?
Vote of thanks. On which?
Hello.
Yes. Yes, Smita.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. I am Smita Godse. On behalf of SAM, I am here.
Yes, we can hear you, madam.
Yes, we can hear you.
Smita Dai, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, this must be quite new normal for others, but it's very new for me. So I'm really very sorry. So I'm Smita Godse. On behalf of SA, I'm here for the last part of today's agenda, the vote of thanks. SA President Shri Abhay Keleji welcomed everyone, shared his views about 24th May World Schizophrenia Awareness Day program, the late Aditya Pense Memorial Lecture. I am sure we all were very curious and enthusiastic for this first webinar meeting, thanks to COVID-19. Otherwise, we couldn't have adopted to this modern technology. Pranjali Barve. Special thanks to Ms. Pranjali Barve. Special thanks to Ms. Pranjali Barve for giving a great start to this program with her melodious song. It's to the entire event. I would like to mention here that Pranjali has herself composed this song, which is written by her mother. Thank you, Pranjali. On World Schizophrenia Awareness Day, we always invite a person who has contributed outstandingly in psychiatric field. Our former president, Shri Bakshi ji, suggested to invite Dr. Manoj Kumar for this event. Our vice president, Professor Dr. Anil Vartak, took this responsibility, and so today we were here. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Manoj Kumar here as a speaker for our today's program. We could learn a lot from Dr. Manoj Kumar, how his innovative ideas were implemented and what tireless efforts he had to take for these innovations. Simply great. He created a model for all-round improvement of poor mentally ill patients through his organization MHAT. He firmly believes that there is a great opportunity to expand his decentralized model for mental health care in India. Indeed, it may be worth considering the replication of this model across the country. His sacrifice and love for the country is really very commendable and inspiring. Thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time. Thank you, sir, for very sorry.
तुमचा आजचा परफॉर्मन्स देखील चांगला होता.
So we are concluding the session. I can see Mr. Vijay Nalwala. I can see.
Thank you, sir, for sparing your valuable time and sharing your views with us. Salute to you, sir.
Okay,
We have already understood from Professor Dr. Anil Vartak about Dr. Amar Shinde. I would like to call him an all-round personality in this field of mental health. Hats off his dedicated work in psychiatry and especially in the field of dementia. He explained his subject, treatment, rehabilitation, and community care of enduring mental illnesses and introduced his organization Jagruti Rehab Center.
Thank you.
I would like to thank him as he gave us a big helping hand in initiating and hosting this new technological web meeting, which was very new and unique to all of us. Thank you so much for taking the responsibility of hosting the entire program and making the facility available for SA. Now a few words for Professor Dr. Anil Vartak, our Vice President, who came forward to hold this webinar meeting. He took the responsibility as a convener and, as we see, is done in a very disciplined way. He is more into awareness programs, stigma removal programs, internship programs for college students and volunteers, etc. And he has developed a very good writing skill. His articles in newspapers have become a usual thing. He shared his views about recovery in a very simple language and has appealed people to join these groups to learn coping skills for better life. I am glad to see a handsome number of viewers participated in this webinar. People from Dhulia, Jalgaon, Nasik, Satara, Karhad, Sangli, Bid, Aurangabad, Amravati, etc. and also from Delhi, Bhopal, Essence Group, Ahmedabad and Chennai with Pune were present for this webinar. This was really very amazing. This was really very amazing and inspiring meeting indeed. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you to our President Abhay Keleji, who has always been supportive and motivating person. Thank you to our dear Shubhartis and Shubhankars, who have always been with us, and not forgetting our staff and volunteers, especially our rehab in charge Aarti and office in charge Milinda Bhalekar, who helped in looking after virtual logistics with Dr. Amar Shinde. I must not forget to thank all the viewers on Facebook, as it was a live there as well. My sincere apologies if I have missed out to mention anyone here. So, it was all of you, the audience on Zoom and Facebook, who made it a success. Thank you, everyone. Have a cheerful evening. Thank you.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. And this is a very memorable program. And I'm sure that many students who are attending this program will definitely like to visit the Mental Health Action Trust work in Kerala. And I'm sure that Dr. Manoj Kumar won't mind their visiting their center. So thank you again. And if you have any query or if you want any help in the future, please contact at our office address. And you're always welcome for any help related to mental health. Thank you very much. Abhijit, do you want to say anything or should we conclude?
Shall I start a YouTube song?
I'm sorry?
अभयजी
हाँ सर बोला सर. Yes sir.
YouTube song चालू करू का कसं?
हो चालेल ना. You can conclude with that song. Yeah.
With the song.
Yes. Okay.
This one, yes. Is it audible?
You are audible, but song is not yet.
Song is not audible. Share computer account.
Shadow from the voices I hear.
Sound is audible? Abhay sir?
Yes. It is audible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Completely crowded with thoughts of fear. Shadow from the voices I hear. Completely crowded with thoughts of fear. I know that the demon is coming near, but rise like a hero and let others fear. You're gonna fight it. You're gonna fight it. This whole situation, you gotta light it. Laugh it out, baby. 'Cause life is too short. Play the game till the end. And channel as you Let the icy cold freeze my seats. The spirit that is haunting my teeth. Let the dragon fly with fury wings. Kill the devil that pierces you with beats. You're gonna fight it. You're gonna fight it. This whole situation. You gotta light it. Laugh it out, baby. Laugh it out, baby. 'Cause life is too short. Life is too short. Play the game till the end. And channel as you Run away, oh, fear. I'ma punch you if you
Thank you.